We're going to get started in 5 minutes. Welcome to seminar, everybody. My name is Matias Cumsille, and Brother Katie has asked me to give a presentation today on the political philosophy of Freemasonry. Before I get started, just for anybody that's new here, attending, seminar is a class that Universal Co-Masonry puts on to help people that are interested in becoming co-masons. So this is mostly going to be a lecture, though I'll stop at different points to ask questions and hear some comments from all of you. But ultimately, the seminar is to prepare people by introducing them to topics that we frequently discuss in Masonic lodges. Those topics range from the arts, sciences, psychology, religion, esotericism, and even politics. That being said, at the end, if anybody's interested in becoming a Mason or has any questions about the presentation or about becoming a Mason, I'll stick around to answer any of those questions. So, political philosophy of Freemasonry. Well, I want to begin with the idea that politics is extremely important in Freemasonry. Now, if any of you are male-craft Masons, you're going to tell me that's wrong. You're thinking it at least, because in male-craft Masonry, there's this idea that you don't talk about politics. We don't talk about religion. We get together and, we have potlucks and spaghetti dinners and we put on regalia and we march around and we do rituals subpar. But at the end of the day, that's not what Masonry is. Masonry is certainly a political system, and I'll provide evidence of this. First of all, what does the word political mean? I mean, we think of, elections, laws, governance, but the word comes from the word polis, which means the city, the people. And so politics is not something that anyone can avoid. When we talk about education, when we talk about healthcare, when we talk about civil institutions, our religions, culture, when we talk about the economy, we talk about our jobs, when we talk about anything, it all intersects with politics. There's no way of avoiding it. And so the way we manage our societies is important to every Freemason, because a society that doesn't manage itself very well is a society that will eventually collapse. And so every Freemason must be political. Now, in Freemasonry, we don't believe that one political party is correct or that one political theory is correct. But we promote the idea that Masons must acquaint themselves with political theory, all the political theories. And so in the course of this presentation, I will talk about communism. I will talk about fascism. I will talk about capitalism. I will talk about socialism. I'm going to talk about all these different words. And I'm not going to tell you that one's evil and one's good, one's better. I mean, we live in a society now that if you just call someone a fascist, it shuts them down. You call them a communist, it shuts them down. That's nonsense. Everybody should be acquainted with these ideas, and everybody should know the history of these ideas, because there's not a single idea that doesn't have some merit. And I'm going to repeat that. There's not a single political theory that does not have some merit. I certainly think there are systems that are better than others, and we each are entitled as Masons and as citizens of this republic that we live in to believe that one is better than the other. But everybody should be able to have a view. And Masonry promotes the idea that the lodge is kind of like a laboratory. It's an experiment in political theory. I say that because today we all live in these democratic, liberal societies where we vote, we have referendums, we can go to the city council and give our opinion. But 300 years ago, none of that existed. 300 years ago, there was only monarchies throughout the entire world, dictatorships, despotism, whatever term you prefer. In Masonic lodges, beginning in the 16th and 1700s, they were some of the first institutions in which regular people could practice government, in that they partook in elections of officers. They drafted bylaws, regulations, constitutions. And so Masonry should be seen as a civilization within a civilization. A civilization within a civilization. Masonry has its own courts. Masonry has its own executive branch. It has its own legislative system. Masonry has its own rules, its own custom, its own language. It is a civilization within a civilization. And it allows people to start practicing the ideas that have become commonplace today. And though they're commonplace today, most people they don't even participate. I mean, what's the voter turnout in countries that don't enforce voting is usually 25% or less. So if you think because you live in America or you live in England or you live in Germany that you are living in a democratic society, you're living in a semi-democratic society because probably 1/4 of the population is voting. And so in a way, you could say it's almost an oligarchy in that a few is deciding for all the people because most of us don't even participate anymore in politics. Now, there's many reasons for that. Many people just think that the system's all rigged. They think there's no point. So there's this idea of nihilism or, this fatalistic view that it doesn't matter. But ultimately, in Masonry, there's the idea that you have to vote. So in a Masonic lodge, for example, when there's a vote, everyone has to vote. You don't get to abstain because abstention is a dereliction of your duty. We must participate or we are to defend our institutions. We need to vote and participate in the system if we hope the systems to get better over time. So abstaining, at least in a Masonic point of view, is what a coward does. The person that does not want to make a decision, the person that's too worried about how people might judge them. Indecision is not the way forward. So the political philosophy of Freemasonry is a practice in politics. And there's different forms of Masonry. There's Masonry from the Grand Lodge of England, in which the Grand Master is a member of the royal family. So you could say that's more authoritarian. It's closer to a monarchy. In America, the Grand Masters are elected every year and replaced every year, which you could say is very democratic. But the problem with that is that nobody ever gets anything done. Because what can a Grand Master do in 1 year? By the time you figure out what's going on, you've had all your flashy balls and events and all the accolades that you receive from being Grand Master, what do you accomplish? You're out of the door and the next one's in. So there's this spectrum of authoritarianism, and on the other hand, of the idea that really nobody's in charge because we don't trust power. So Masonry is an experiment in these. Some jurisdictions, some obediences, like the Grand Lodge of England, there's one Grand Master for decades. The Scottish Rite is also the same way. The Grand Commander who rules over the Scottish Rite is also a position that is until they retire or pass away. And then you have these Grand Lodges that the Grand Masters are elected every year. I say this because it's important to note, again, that there's not one system that's right. We grow up in America, being taught that monarchies are bad. Monarchies are not bad. There are many great things about monarchies in the past. And this idea that every king was just stepping on all the peasants and ruining their lives and taking all their money, that's just nonsense. Anybody that reads history will know that that's not true. That did happen. But for Americans, we live in a democracy that also pushed all the Native Americans out of the continent. As a democracy, we are a country that dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan. We're the only power to have dropped nuclear bombs in a wartime scenario. So just because you're a democracy doesn't mean that you do everything right. And just because you're a monarchy doesn't mean you do everything wrong. There are virtues to all of these different positions. If you take Prince Hall, for example, which is in America, those are the lodges that are for the African Americans. Well, after the Civil War and the institution of Jim Crow, blacks only could practice governance, democracy, elections and creating bylaws in Masonic lodges or other similar fraternal societies. So fraternal society is a very important part of a civilization. So the way I would divide it up is that you have the people at the bottom. At the top, you have the government, but in the middle, you have something called civic society. And civic society is all those institutions that are not a government and not just an individual. And Masonry is one of the most powerful of these civic society institutions. It is a way for people to participate, not at the high levels of government because they have not been elected, but they're participating in something greater than themselves, something more than just their home. One of the reasons I believe that we all feel that civilization is going to hell in a handbasket, because we all kind of feel like something's wrong. We all feel like things are getting worse. There's not a person I've met that doesn't feel this way. They can't articulate it. They can't tell, and nobody can explain why, but everybody feels like people are more divided. They feel that the governments are failing, that the politicians are all liars, and that, extinction could come any day. A war could come any day. The climate is going to, we're all going to die. Whatever you believe, it doesn't matter. But we all have this kind of imminent sense of doom when it comes to civilization. And I think one of the reasons is that we're so disconnected as an individual from our government. We're so distrustful of our politicians. It's because civil society has retreated. 100 years ago, there wasn't a person in our society that didn't belong to a fraternal organization, to some sort of charity. Everybody was participating in fraternal society. But since World War II, and since the advent of television and the social media, people are just sitting at home. It's too much of an effort to participate in civil society. So I think as we disengage as a population from civil society, we are essentially the ones responsible for what's happening to our civilization. I mean, we love to point the finger. Oh, it's Donald Trump. Oh, it's Biden. It's Obama. It's Macron. It's this person. It's that person. But really, you should just turn that finger back on yourself, because we are the problem. We, the people, whether in America or England or Nigeria or Egypt, we are ultimately the source of our own discontent. And civil society is the remedy. Participation in institutions that allow us to practice self-governance, and even to a greater degree, multiculturalism. Because if you're in your house, or maybe you go to a church where everybody looks like you and sounds like you, civil society, fraternities, force you to go to a place and to be with people that don't look like you, they don't think like you, and you become agitated because you're like, wow, these people don't agree with me. Why would I sit next to a Trump supporter? I just can't condone what these people think. But that's exactly what we have to do. You need to sit in a room. We all need to sit in a room with people that we completely disagree with. Because after many, many meetings of being with people you disagree with, you come to be like, well, you know what? They're not that different from me. Oh, you know what? We kind of do agree on more than we disagree. I mean, maybe we disagree on how things should be done, but we kind of agree what should be done. So by retreating from civil society, from retreating from being part of religions and fraternities and charities, we no longer are exposed to ideas. And then we go onto our social media apps. We're on Twitter, we're on, X, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and we're then locked in an algorithm, which is an echo chamber. So we only see what we already think, and then we think that everyone agrees with us, and we become more outraged at the fact that things aren't running the way we want them to. But if you go to a lodge, for example, a Masonic lodge, I'm not saying Masonry is the only outlet for this, but I still think it's the best, obviously. Then you are exposed to things that you may not like. And in that exposure, you develop tolerance and understanding. And it is the only way for us to advance the ideals of multiculturalism globalism, and internationalism, which, yes, all three of those are Masonic ideas. Really, in many ways, Masonry was, I don't want to say it was the inventor, but it was one of the first institutions to promote multiculturalism, globalism, and internationalism. Because Masonic lodges existed all over Europe. They spread to the Americas. They spread to Asia. They spread to India, into Africa. And there was at least the seeds of multiculturalism. And more so, these lodges existed between different countries. But yet, a Masonic brother would travel to another country and he would immediately identify with the other Masons. So it was super territorial in that there was a bond that I had as a Mason with other Masons that existed above my nationality, my citizenship, my religion. And so Masonry was the foundation of the world we live in, which is a world that Masons envision to be one of cooperation, understanding, and tolerance. Now, I say this, but Masons in many places have failed to live up to these ideals. It's one of the reasons I'm a co-Mason, because as a co-Mason, I sit in lodge with women. I sit in lodge with Black people. I sit in lodge with Jews. I sit in lodge with Buddhists and Hindus. I sit in lodge with homosexuals and people that are transgender. Ideas that other Masonic lodges have not accepted for centuries. And shame on them. Shame on all the lodges that have not accepted women. Shame on all the lodges that do not accept Jews or homosexuals. It was not until 1989, that the American Grand Lodges started recognizing Prince Hall Masons. Can you believe that? Civil rights had, the Civil War had come and gone. Jim Crow was come and gone. Civil rights had come and gone. And then maybe about 20 years later, basically in 1990, the Grand Lodge Connecticut was like, oh, maybe we should recognize Prince Hall Masons. I frankly think it's disgusting. Again, that's why I'm a co-Mason. Now, everybody be like, oh, well, to each their own. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's fine. You think taxes should be higher. I think they should be lower, to each their own. But when it comes to things like race, sexual orientation, who are we to say you don't get to exist? You don't get to live the way you want to live. Masonry is a bastion, or it ought to be a bastion, for all the peoples of the world, regardless of their choices. So when I say that Masonry is a model, I'm not saying all Masonry is a model. It was in theory. If you read the rituals that Masons repeated 300 years ago, the ideas were in those rituals. Did they practice them? No, because they were bigots, they were misogynists. So, as Masonry now enters the 21st century, it has to reassert itself as an institution of civil society. It has to begin practicing the ideals that have been in its rituals for centuries, which again are multiculturalism, globalism, internationalism, cooperation, tolerance, understanding, love for people. Yes, we can certainly all disagree with one another, but that does not give us the right to exclude people. So I say all of this is to set the foundation for today's discussion, which I'm going to center around the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity, which are words that people love to repeat, and most people do not have an understanding of what these words mean. Liberty doesn't mean you get to do whatever the hell you want. Equality doesn't mean that everybody is actually the same, because obviously none of us are the same. There's not two people that are the same on the planet. We're not genetically the same. We're not mentally the same. We're not the same in any way. Equality means something completely different. And fraternity, the true concept of fraternity, is not belonging to a club. It's not belonging to a race or to an ethnos, to an ethnicity. Fraternity is the idea of universal brotherhood. Now, let's take a step back from everything I've said. And I want to present three ideas of how basically people, philosophers have viewed the world. There's three ideas: dualism, idealism, and materialism. And I present these because they present kind of the three different ways people kind of view the world. I could break these down even more, but really, there's three camps, essentially, right? So dualism, well, in each of these, so there's the idea of like the body and the mind, or the material world, and let's say the spiritual world. In dualism, there's kind of this interchange. There's the mind and there's the body. There's mind and matter, right? So say matter affects the mind and mind affects matter. Mind affects body, body affects mind. Idealism is where the mind essentially dictates the body, what the body is going to be, or controls the body. In materialism, you know what? I screwed this up. Sorry. That last arrow is supposed to be flipped. So materialism is where matter basically dictates to the mind. So matter exists first, and from matter comes mind. I apologize. I screwed up the arrows there. So you can either see that it's a two-way system, an interchange. You can see that the mind or the spiritual world informs the body or the material world, or you can see that matter controls the mind or the spiritual world. And these essentially, this is very basic stuff here, but this is dualism, idealism, and materialism. The reason I bring these up is because there's the first idea here is in political theory is the idea of utility, utilitarianism, which is basically a material theory. This is the doctrine that action is right insofar as it promotes happiness, and that the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people should be the guiding principle of conduct. It's the good of the many outweighs the good of the few or the one. All of us, in some way or another, are partial utilitarian, Democracy is utilitarian. We're like, well, the majority gets to decide things. It's because, that's the most amount of people, and we got to cater to the most. The problem is, and this is a drawback of democracy, is what about the minority? The second idea is rights, human rights. Any of you that believes in human rights, you're basically a dualist. So rights are this like in the natural is a sense of something not being man-made, but it's it's intrinsic, eternal. Either it comes from nature, it comes from God. They're universal. They can be applied to all people. They're not social constructs. These are ideas that they have existed for all time. And even if all human beings disappeared, they would still exist. This is tied to dualism because there is a link between our actions and what we think. Now, a lot of people believe in human rights. They'll spew the word, healthcare is human rights. This is, a women's, right to abortion is a human right. And it's fine to believe those things, but we have to be careful when we say those things because 300 years ago, there was no sense of human rights. Like, human rights is actually kind of a modern idea that modern political philosophers have discussed and debated. People like John Locke and Rousseau and David Hume and so forth. And this is, if human rights was always this, this idea that we understood in our hearts, well, why didn't people 1,000 years ago understand that? Why did we just discover human rights? I'm not saying that they haven't always existed, but we didn't start talking about them until a few hundred years ago. So we have to be careful when we think, well, the ancients believed in human rights. They had no sense of human rights. And even if they are an invention, they're a pretty damn good invention. And next we have virtue, which is what I tie to idealism. Virtue is the disciplined alignment of character with what is true, just, and right. It is a steady choice to act according to principle rather than impulse, and to uphold moral law even when it offers no reward. The reason I tie virtue with idealism because the ideal, because the virtues are basically the ideal in practice, says it doesn't really matter. It's the opposite of utilitarian. It doesn't matter what's good for the most. What's good is doing the right thing, even if everyone suffers. So if you're a person's like, I have to be honest no matter what, I have to do the right thing no matter what, then you're an idealist. And if you think, well, it's okay to lie sometimes, it's okay to do this or that sometimes, it's whatever makes, everyone happy and brings out the general good, you're a utilitarian. And that's more of a materialist philosophy. And if you're this person that says, well, virtue is important and utility is important, well, you're kind of a dualist. You go back and forth. These three are important because I call these first principles because often, people like, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm this and that. People say these things and we don't even know what they mean. What does it mean to be a socialist? What does it mean to be a fascist? What does it mean to be a capitalist? People don't even know what these are. We use these labels because we've been told by our parents, by our community that we are these things, and we don't even understand where they come from. That we don't even understand where they come from. And all political theories, all political parties are derived from one of these three. Now, sometimes there's overlap. I said I've oversimplified this for the sake of the presentation, and there's overlap. You can kind of believe in two of these a little bit, but you can never, as you approach the purity and the belief of one, it's at the exclusion of the other two. And so you have to start asking yourself, well, why, if you're a Democrat, for example, well, why are you a Democrat? Oh, I care about people. Well, guess what? Conservatives care about people too. I mean, I know you might want to demonize them and say they don't care about people, but that's nonsense. And if you're a Republican, a conservative, and you just think, all Democrats don't care about a meritocracy. You think they just want to give everything away for free, that they're lazy people, that they just, they just want to create subsistence programs for everyone. That's nonsense too. Most of what we hear on the news is nonsense. Most of what we hear on social media is nonsense. Two Republicans aren't the same. Two Democrats are not the same. But ultimately, when you talk to a person, and if you approach them by trying to understand whether they are utilitarian in their approach, they're rights-based in their approach, or they're virtue-based in where they come from, you will begin to understand the way they think. None of these are wrong, by the way. They've all served a purpose in the evolution of humanity and our civilizations. But each of us, we're going to feel more comfortable with one of these. For example, I'm an idealist, 100%. I think you should do the right thing no matter the consequence. It does not matter how many people suffer, how many people care. We must do the right thing. That's me. And I understand there are people that are opposite of me, that are utilitarian, and I respect them very much. But we must understand where we come from on these topics. So I'm going to tie this back in the next few charts. This is a chart to help us understand where we come from, right? Virtue, utility, or rights. At the top of so I've put liberty, equality, fraternity at 3 corners. Liberty's at the top, equality is at the bottom left, and fraternity is on the bottom right. You will also notice that I have the 3 kind of extreme isms. So communism is the closest to democracy, and communism are closest to equality. Fascism and nationalism are closest to fraternity, and libertarianism, anarchism, and laissez-faire is closest to liberty. You'll see the arrow. So as you approach the bottom right, which is fraternity, which is in its extreme form fascism and nationalism, it it depends on hierarchy, stratification. It's collective in nature. On the bottom left, you'll see that as you approach communism and democracy, and I look, when I say communism, people argue, well, Stalinism wasn't really, communism, and I don't disagree. So I'm talking about communism in its ideological form, not in its practice per se, which tends to be more dictatorial. So as you approach democracy and communism, you have to get rid of stratification, you have to get rid of hierarchy, and morality becomes more subjective. Because the more diversity you have, well, you're going to have to start being a little more subjective. We can't just say that one thing's right because there's so many different people with opinions. While on the bottom right, fascism and nationalism, there's one right way to do everything. Now at the top, liberty, you get more objective morality and you get more individualism. That's what anarchy is. Anarchy, and it's not, burning buildings down and throwing, bombs at people. That's not what anarchy is. Anarchy is the idea that people should govern themselves, which is a very noble idea. It may just be impossible in our state of evolution. But liberty essentially is the idea that there's these objective human rights. We are endowed by our creator, right? That every man is free and a sovereign. But that's an idea that people that gravitate towards liberty believe. Now, if you're a liberal, you're kind of somewhere on the middle left. If you're a conservative, you're somewhere on the middle right. Fascism and communism, which are basically like they're brothers of one another, they're not that different, are on the bottom. Because they're opposite of liberty. Nationalism is opposite of libertarianism. Democracy is the opposite of laissez-faire. And there's a triangle which is reactionary. So communism and fascism is essentially reactionary movements to what people think are imminent decay, imminent declines in their civilizations. So communism and fascism appears as a reaction to something that's happening. We go to the history of Adolf Hitler, Mussolini, and Salazar, and all these fascists, but they're basically reactionary movements to social decay. They didn't just appear one day. If people think that Hitler was just some bad guy that showed up in the 1920s, no, he is the byproduct of the Allied powers in World War I punishing Germany in a war that it did not start. And Hitler is the byproduct when you punish nations. This is why at the end of World War II, we launched the Marshall Plan and we rebuilt Germany and Western Europe and Japan because we realized if we punished them, they would just have another reactionary movement that we would have to deal with another 20 years down the road. So we rebuilt these countries and created them into thriving liberal democracies in order to avoid the reaction. Communism in the Soviet Union was a reactionary movement to the oppression of the Tsar, to the oppression of the upper classes. We're all somewhere on this chart, okay? We're all somewhere on this chart. The goal is to be in the middle. The goal is to be the centrist, because the centrist is at the only position that you are not overtaken by sentiment and by the waves of cultural decline, because you're standing in the middle. So you understand that liberty is important, equality is important, and fraternity is important. But if you're one of the people that loves equality, you're like, oh, we all got to be equal, equal opportunity, equal, outcome for everybody. Well, you're moving towards the bottom left. That means you're going to have to give up liberty and you're going to have to give up fraternity. And if you're one of these people like, oh, we need to maintain our civilization, we got to stop all immigration. We can't let our culture is in decline, and we can't allow any of these people come and change everything because they're ruining who we are. Well, that's fraternity. That's the extreme form of fraternity. Well, you're giving up equality and you're giving up liberty. And if you're one of these libertarian, anarchist types, which I used to be, I still am in my heart, maybe, but then you're like, well, you're abandoning the idea of equality and fraternity. And you're just becoming an individual, an island unto yourself. Because the more you move toward liberty, you kind of just like, well, it's me and I get to do what I want and, whatever. It doesn't really matter what happens with everybody else. It doesn't matter what happens to the rest of the nation. We have to be in the center. Masonry is pushing you towards the center. It literally says this in its rituals, that a point within the circle is the best place to be, and it is from that point within a circle that a master mason cannot err. Now, today we're living in a world of extremes. So everyone, you start talking to people, and people are becoming either more fascist or more communistic, in my opinion, or more anarchistic. That's where everybody's moving to the extremes. We all are in some ways. So we have to be careful. We have to move back to the center. So I have the triangle on the right here. In a Masonic way, liberty begins when you stop lying to yourself, right? It is the courage to discipline your appetite. So this is liberty. I'm now bringing in like the Masonic way of looking at these, less like the cultural way of looking at it. You got to stop lying to yourself. You have to start disciplining your appetites, because really what liberty is self-control. It's not that you get to do whatever you want. That's a misuse of the word liberty. You don't get to do whatever you want. Liberty is the ability to control yourself. Stop making excuses. Choose the harder path because it is right. It is the ability to build the self. And what I say is that a Mason may be confined to a prison and be more free than those that are guarding him. Okay? Like liberty doesn't mean that you're not in a jail. Liberty doesn't mean that you can go out and yell at people. It doesn't mean that you get to punch people in the face on the streets. Liberty means you have the right to control yourself. And whether you are in a prison, whether somebody's tied you up and they put a gun to your head and they're like, no, you need to believe X. You can be like, no. They might blow your brains out. It doesn't matter. Because you have control over yourself. So Masonic liberty, not cultural liberty, not American liberty or English liberty or these other kinds of liberty. This is Masonic liberty. It is to control yourself. And that should be of the utmost importance to the Mason, to control yourself, to subdue your passions, to quell your appetites, and to build yourself up as a human being. Whoop. Now, equality, Masonic equality, is not the bogus idea that men and women are exactly the same, that blacks and whites are exactly the same. It's not the idea that it's same, that sameness. That's wrong. We are not the same. Why would we want to be the same? What makes humanity beautiful and rich, according to Masonry, is the diversity between us. Our diversity of thoughts, our diversity in looks, our diversity in our approach to life, the diversity of our spirituality, of our art. We live in a society now that we believe somehow that equality means sameness, homogeny. Masonry despises homogeneity. We don't want people to speak the same languages. We do not want people to practice all the same religion. We don't want people to view the world the same way, to have the same politics. Masonic equality is the recognition that when you get rid of your titles, your wealth, your ego, all these things, these labels we've made for ourselves, we're all just souls. We're all shards of the Creator. And that's where we're equal. One soul is not greater than another soul. We are all representation of God's infinite glory. And each of us presents a different version of God in the way we look, the way we speak, the way we act. the way we believe. And this is the basis of multiculturalism, that we need to be able to live in a society where it's okay that there are Muslims who, they want the prayer to call every morning, when the sun goes up. We don't need to be scared that they're bringing Sharia law. They can have their own Sharia law. Christians can be Christians and live like Christians. Jews can be Jews and live like Jews. Atheists can be atheists and live like atheists. Yes, we have to have a common ground. But at the end of the day, the existence of people that live differently than me does not jeopardize my way of life. Obviously, there are those that are fanatics and maybe they, strap a bomb to themselves. Well, those people should go to jail. But barring violence, everyone has the right to live the way they want to. And when we live that way, we are enriched. We are culturally enriched. We're spiritually enriched. We are stronger because of our diversity. But if you think that we all have to be the same, that's not what Masonry is teaching. We are not the same. There's nothing similar to two human beings. But before the law, we should be treated equally. If I murder someone, and Brother Patrick or Brother Ben over here, they murder somebody, we should all be treated before the law equally. And that's what Masonry teaches. We should be treated the same. Nobody gets special privileges. Fraternity. Fraternity is the discipline of standing with men you did not choose to stand with. It is the refusal to retreat into your own comfort. It demands that you speak honestly, give quietly, and hold one another to the same standard. It is not affection. It is a covenant of shared struggle. I'm reminded of the Masonic idea of fraternity of Brother Voltaire, who said, I may not believe in anything that you're saying, but I will die that you have the right to say it. That is what Masons believe, that the true fraternity is holding everyone to the same standard and the idea that I will defend you even if I disagree with everything that you have to say, because you have the right to say it. It is freedom of conscience, it's freedom of thought, it's freedom of action, it's freedom of religion, it's freedom of speech. And that's what we do in a Masonic lodge. Somebody might present a lecture on the topic, and everybody has the right to give their opinion. An opinion that might piss everybody off. It does not matter. You have the right to give your opinion, and everyone else has the ability to comment on it. And the people that cannot control themselves, they should excuse themselves, because Masonry is not for them. Masonry is the ability to sit with your enemy and play chess with him. Liberty is autonomy, equality is solidarity, and fraternity is loyalty. And I say these in the best ways. In the worst ways, they are anarchy, communism, and fascism. In their best, they are autonomy, solidarity, and loyalty. And I present this Masonic symbol of the point within a circle with two parallel lines, also known as the two Johns, though I'm not going to get into that symbolism here. I'm sure Brother Katie's brought it up. Here we have the idea that the truth is always in the middle. Why? Because a circle has 360 degrees. Its circumference, if you try to calculate it, is infinite. So the outside of the circle represents every possible opinion that humanity has had, does have, and will have. And the person who can stand in the middle of that is someone that can appreciate all of them. And I mean all of them. If you can't read about Mussolini and appreciate what was happening at that time, you are biased. If you can't read about Mao Zedong in China, then you don't understand history. All these figures, a Napoleon, a Charlemagne, Richard III, the pharaohs of Egypt, King Nebuchadnezzar, Cyrus, all of these these emperors and kings and queens, these civil rights leaders, these scientists, these people like Karl Marx, who had such an influence on us, they are all an expression of the divine trying to be made manifest. And we should understand that. We don't have to agree, but we should understand and understand that they played a part in the evolution of mankind. And I present this as a scenario to this belief. Hitler's the most evil because Hitler's now like, you call someone Hitler, it's like worse than calling somebody the devil, which is crazy to me. But like Hitler in World War II and the entire insanity of that event led to the global order we live in. And I know there's so many of us that think that we're living in the worst time of human history, and that's just nonsense. We're literally living at the apex of human history. You look at the quality of life, you look at life expectancy, mortality rates, infant mortality. You look at the ability for people to vote, people's literacy rates. We are living at the apex. 100 years ago, you may have only been expected to live 30 years. We now live up to 70, 80 years. Children all basically survive. Extreme famine has been reduced to 4% when it used to be 90-something%. We are living at the apex of human civilization, at least materialistically. At least materialistically we are. But again, I go back to the scenario of World War II. We entered this global order we live in, this place where you can buy goods from different countries, where you can travel where you want to, where there's relative peace. Because yes, after World War II, there's been Korea, Vietnam, Iraq. These are all minor events. What's happening in Ukraine is a minor event. World War II was an event where 100 million people died. And Europe was leveled, and Asia was leveled. We're living at the apex. And it's because of World War II. People came out of World War II and said, we don't want to do that again. We don't want to live that way again. And so out of the destruction and misery and the evils of World War II, of what happened, we built a better world. And we have to understand those facts. And the Mason seeks to understand those things. He seeks to understand why we've arrived where we are, and more importantly, how do we move forward? This is not the end of history. We are just at the beginning of an endless quest in the perfection of humanity. And in that quest, we must learn from the past. Not demonize the past, but understand, how did a Hitler come about? Why did Hitler do what he did? Everybody should read Mein Kampf, which is the book he wrote when he was in jail in the 1920s. Not to praise him, but to understand him. All information in Masonry is important. There are no taboos. There is nothing that's considered illegal or wrong. In our libraries, we have all the anti-Masonic material, because it's just as important to understand what the enemies of Masonry say as those that vindicate its history. You must understand all the theories. And that's the only way we're going to embark towards the future. So, to bring this a little closer to Masonry, we use three symbols that universally recognized: the level, the plumb, and the square. And they generally can mean, at one level of understanding, at a political understanding, equality, fraternity, and liberty. Some people might even rearrange these virtues, these political ideas with the instruments, but this is how I put them together. And the idea in this country and in most Western democracies of three branches of government, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, can be directly connected with Masonry. I'm not saying Masonry invented these, but I think Masonry actually made these popular and disseminated their ideas in such a way as that the founding fathers of the various Western democracies implemented them as we see them used today. So what we call the worshipful master, or the master of the lodge, is essentially, with the square, is the representation of the executive branch. The legislative branch is the senior warden, who is the second in command of the Masonic Lodge. And the junior warden, which is the plum, is representative of the judicial branch. In one way or the other, all modern governments have this kind of trinity, this holy political trinity, because it's how we divide powers: executive, legislative, and judicial. And in Masonry, you see this in what we call the three principal officers of a lodge, an idea that existed before the French Revolution, before the United States Constitution. It existed centuries ago, before the advent of these modern liberal democracies. Because again, as I said earlier, Masonry is politics at play. It is a laboratory. It is the experiment. We see this also at another level. So in the universal rite that we practice, and also in the Scottish rite practiced by Mailcraft Masons, you have 33 degrees. Well, the 33rd degree is the executive, the 32nd degree is the legislative, and the 31st degree is the judicial. So the Grand Inspectors General, which is the title for the 33rd degree, is the executive. They form what is called the Supreme Council. The 32nd degrees, which are the royal princes, they form something called a consistory, which is essentially a legislative body. And the 31st degree, which are called the Grand Inquisitor Commanders, form the judicial branch. So people that have committed Masonic crimes are brought before this tribunal. But at another level, we can see, we're going to go down now to the first, second, and third degree of Masonry, which is the Inner Apprentice, the Inner Apprentice, the Fellow Craftsman, the Master Mason. But first, I'm going to, in order to introduce this idea, I'm going to go back to Plato's Republic. So Plato wrote a book called Plato's Republic. It's the ideal republic. Everyone should read it. If you haven't, there's no way to understand how essentially we've gotten to this day and time, because it is basically the most inspirational piece of political theory created thousands of years ago that men have been contemplating in our attempt to create a more perfect union. And so Plato says that essentially that there are three classes in the ideal city: the guardians, the auxiliaries, and the producers. You could also see this as essentially the nobility, the military, the army, or its guardians, and the producers. That's the laborers, right? And the reason it's a pyramid is because there's more laborers than auxiliaries, and there's more auxiliaries than there are nobility. But he says that our own soul is divided this way. So in our own soul, it's a tripartite soul. So we have, at the bottom of our soul, we have our desires. In the middle, we have the spirit. And at the highest level, we have reason. And so this is where the cardinal virtues come forth, these virtues that we practice in Masonry, because there's four virtues we practice in Masonry: temperance, fortitude, prudence, and justice. And so temperance is always the first of these, because the producer, the laborer, the common man, his job is to work on his desires. The soldier in this ideal republic has to work on his spirit. And when I say spirit, I mean, it's like your emotions, it's your sentiments. So you have to gain fortitude or courage to fight the feelings inside of you. While your desires is your inclination to eat too much or drink too much or have too much sex or, not work at all. These are your desires. So they're material things. Now, the people at the top, the nobility, the guardians, or what Plato called the philosopher kings, they must develop prudence, because prudence is how you maximize reason. Now, people will be like, well, this is very stratified. The labor should be equal to the guardians and to the auxiliaries. Well, but that's just not how any society has ever existed in all of human history. You can argue it all you want. Even in communism, there were still people on top, and you still had a military, and then you had everybody else. You can break this down in more levels you want to, but you basically can fit everyone in any society into these three levels. The people that work, the proletariat, if you want to call them, the military, and the government. But if we want to have the best government, then the people must practice temperance, the military must practice fortitude, and our leaders must learn prudence. And then you say, well, where's justice? Well, justice is what occurs only after these three have aligned themselves. You can't practice justice. You can't learn justice. It's just something that happens after you've obtained temperance, fortitude, and prudence. So we must begin this work in our souls. This is what Masonry is teaching us. And when we practice these in our own soul, then these will be exemplified in our civilizations. That's what Plato said. Well, in Masonry, here in the next slide, you'll see it's divided exactly the same way. The enter apprentices are working to control their lower appetites. The fellow craft is practicing courage. And if any of you are fellow craft, you'll know exactly why I'm saying that. And the master masons represent the philosopher king, the guardians of masonry. And they are developing reason, prudence, an understanding. I bring this up because masonry is, again, it is a civilization. It is a civilization. It is a civilization within a civilization. And those of us that practice it, we can start to practice these virtues and ideas in greater society. We can bring this to our fellow man. But again, what is the political theory of masonry? I've said a lot of things, but what is the exact political theory? Is it a democracy? Is it a republic? Is it an empire? What is masonry? Well, masonry is all of them because they're all good. They're just good in different ways and at different times. Democracy is a wonderful thing, but it doesn't actually solve every problem. If you think it does, it's ludicrous. Plato said that democracy can be very easily undone, and when it does, it just goes back to dictatorship. And I'll get there in a moment. So the definition of democracy, rule of the majority. Problem is the rule of the majority is also the, you could also call it the tyranny of the majority. Because what? Okay, it's 2025. What do the majority of Americans say? We want slavery to come back. Wow, that's wrong. Well, why? That's what the majority wants. In a democracy, the majority rules, right? So what if the majority says, let's lock up all the Jews? Well, that's not right. So democracy doesn't always work. But when it really does work well is in small groups. So in masonry, at the local level, and I would say also like in our counties, in our cities, democracy is extremely powerful because there's few of us and we know each other, that democracy can be practiced very well. But the larger your institutions get and the bigger your nations get, democracy starts to fail because it does not work with a lot of people. It works in more intimate settings. So in a particular Masonic lodge, we practice democracy. The lodges are the ones that determine who gets to be Masons, who gets accepted into the lodge. One lodge doesn't determine it for another lodge. Each lodge is its own like little city. And they vote who gets allowed to join the lodge. They also vote for the master of the lodge each year. They vote for their wardens. It's almost a direct democracy, but only at the local level. I mean, how many of us, we all live, if we're Americans, we all live in a state, but we don't feel like we have much input in the state, I mean, we elect the governor and all that, but really, we're just a fish in an ocean. Like we don't, our say doesn't matter, but your say does matter at a local level. In your city council, you can go and speak. At the state level, no one's going to afford you an opportunity to say anything, let alone the national level, right? So democracy is good, but when it's practiced in smaller environments. Masonry is a republic. So a republic is, when the supreme power rests in elected representatives. And why do we do that? Because again, at a bigger at a bigger level, like or at a higher level, excuse me, yeah, I can't go to Washington every time there's a vote, right? So we elect representatives, we elect senators, and they represent us. And that's good. And so in Masonry, this is at a regional level. Masonry has something called a Grand Lodge, which is all the lodges put together. And each lodge sends a representative or is made up of the past masters of those lodges, and they make decisions at a greater level. Never decisions that infringe on the lodge, but laws that are for the good of all the lodges together. So this is where we see Masonry practice as a republic, no longer as a direct democracy, because at this level it would be folly to do so. And we do this in our country as we elect state representatives and state senators. Oh, here comes the evil word monarchy. Kings are bad. No, they're not. There's been very benevolent kings. And historically, if you analyze medieval kingdoms, and also like in you could study India and China. Do you know that somebody living in the 14th century paid essentially no higher than 10% total taxes? Somebody living in a Western democracy, our taxes range somewhere from 30 to 60%. In Europe, it's on the higher end. America is what drags it down. But even here, we pay a lot of taxes. So almost half your money, if not half your money, is taken in social programs that most of us don't directly benefit from. In some places like Canada and England, they have universal health care, so you get a little more. But essentially, in America, even if you pay privately, you would end up paying, you pay less than in these social systems. But it takes care of the poor, which I think is an important thing. But again, my point is that in monarchies, they also had many. I know we think there were a lot of wars. The wars were actually infrequent compared to the modern age, and they were far less deadly because the king couldn't just keep you for 10 years in a war. A, because somebody had to go back and harvest the crops, but B, because people just go home. So it was more peaceful in some ways. And in many ways, it was less taxes, and people were actually kind of more free. There were more holidays in the medieval era. There's this idea. Today, we in the Western world, we are overworked compared to most of history. Most people just work, 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 work. You get a few days off. In the medieval ages, you I wouldn't say it was half, but you probably had a good 30, 40% of the year off because there were so many holidays, and they knew this. Now, look, I'm not trying to say that medieval ages was better because it wasn't in many ways, but like this idea that kings were bad, no. The king didn't own the country. The nobles owned the country. They had serfs. And you're like, well, we don't do that today. Well, of course we do that today. We're all just modern serfs. You and I and everyone else. Oh, yeah, we get to maybe own our house, but even if you've paid off your mortgage, you still have to pay property taxes, or the county comes and takes your house and auctions it off to somebody else like a medieval lord would. So let's not pretend that we actually own anything. We pay off our mortgage only to pay rent to the county and property taxes. It's a better world today because we're not all dying all the time, and we have medicine and we have hygiene and we have all these wonderful things. So I'd much rather live today than any point in ancient history. But let's not pretend that it's not just the same type of thing, just improved. We are all serfs. We are all serfs. We can be conscripted. We can go to war if our lords so deem so, even in Western liberal democracies. So let's not pretend that it's any different. It's just a lot more comfortable. We have refrigeration. We have cell phones because we have electricity. But if there had continued to be kings, they would have eventually invented power and cell phones. It would probably just been a lot slower. So monarchy. Let me get my tirade out here about monarchies. I'm so tired of people saying that monarchies are all evil. Read a book. It's not true. We have monarchs in Masonry. That's what a Grand Master is. And if it's a Scottish Rite system, you have a Grand Commander. These are monarchs. Now, again, in some systems, the monarch is elected, but they usually, in many, at least in Europe, they're ad vitam, and if they're not, they're still elected by those elected representatives. It's not a direct vote. But we have a monarch. The president of the United States we don't call him a monarch, but the president is just a title for the same thing. We elect a monarch, an executive. We just don't like the title. And monarchy doesn't necessarily mean that the king, passes it down to their son or daughter. That's how some monarchies do it. In the Holy Roman Empire, for example, which existed a very long time, there were electors from all the states of the Holy Roman Empire that selected the next emperor. So there's different ways to have a monarch, but essentially every country needs to have a leader. And Masonry is no different. Which we finally get to the idea of empire, which I know people are like, oh, empire, Star Wars, it's just evil. It's Darth Vader, it's Napoleon, it's Hitler. No, America has an empire. The American empire is a real thing. It's probably the most powerful empire the world has ever seen. An empire is a group of states or country under a single supreme authority. Well, guess what? There are 50 states, and those 50 states are under a federal government. That is an empire. We just use different terminology because words bother people, but the real term is an empire. Federation is another term. But we live in an American empire. And not only are there 50 states, but we have territories. And outside of those territories, we then exert influence about every square inch of this entire planet. Our empire is no different than the Roman Empire. It's just better. Everyone's better off in the American Empire than they were in the Roman Empire. Empire is the idea ultimately of federation. And federation is the most noble exemplification of empire because the federation is where people voluntarily come together to form a greater and more powerful union. As 13 colonies, which were then freed into 13 nations, came together to draft a constitution in order to unite themselves. Yes, the founding fathers had many flaws and they allowed slavery. A travesty, a stain on America, no doubt. Nevertheless, what they accomplished in the 1790s was amazing. 13 newly freed nations came together and said, we're going to work together to create a more perfect union. And that vision has come true because those colonies turned into 13 states, which became 50 states. And those 50 states allowed women to vote in 1919. It was those same states that granted civil rights. This union has become more perfect for every flaw, for every mistake, for every problem. And it has made many, 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 many mistakes and committed many atrocities. It has ultimately become a more perfect union. And we should never forget that because America sets an example with all its flaws of what the world should become. The European Union is it's a more modern, but it's another example of the countries of Europe after World War II saying, let us come together. Let's stop fighting. Let's have one currency. Let's allow people to travel without passports. Let's work together for a better world. You can make all the complaints you want at the European Union with their immigration quotas, this or that, and I think there's a lot of legitimate complaints we can make about America and the European Union. But the idea is an idea that has rarely come up in human history. And frankly, I think the biggest flaw of America is that we stopped growing. We should have more than 50 states. The European Union should continue its expansion. Not militaristically, not by coercion, but by saying, who else wants to come and join? Let's work together. Let's share our resources. Let's share our cultures. Let's share our languages. And where did this idea come from? This idea came from Masonry, in my opinion, because Masonry is the first institution in a modern way to practice this concept of federation, where you have lodges in different countries under the same organization that allow different rituals, different cultures to express themselves, but in a united way. That's Masonry. That's Masonry, and that's where America came from. That's the idea of the European Union. They're in their infancy. They may all fall apart, but the future of the world is a world where we're working together in more closer conformity of the idea that we are better because of our differences. We should stop fighting and we should cooperate. This is essential, in my opinion, to the evolution of the human race, and it is what Masonry provides humanity. So I'm going to conclude now, because I think we're coming to the end. I can't tell you in a few words necessarily what the Masonic political theory is, but I can tell you its aspects, its attributes. Masons believe government is a moral framework, not a power distribution system. Just like Plato, if our leaders are wise, if they're prudent, who have learned temperance and courage, who can control their appetites, who can control their emotions, and practice reason, then it doesn't really matter which system we use, because all the systems would work fine as long as our leaders were good. And that's ultimately the problem. It's like people think, well, if we change our systems, it'll be better. Maybe, maybe not. Ultimately, the problem is we need better leaders. And we're only going to get better leaders when we have better institutions. Politicians used to become Masons. They don't anymore. So where do they learn how to be politicians? They don't. They don't learn it. They just copy other politicians, and they become Machiavellian. Civil society, institutions that are like Masonry or Masonry, they teach a moral framework which allows our leaders to practice being a politician more righteously. Masonry believes in freedom of conscience, thought, and action. You have the right to think, to act, to speak, and to be the way you want. End of story. Masonry believes in the rule of law over the rule of man. The rule of law is paramount. We follow our laws to the end. Demagogues and idolatry. Well, see, we don't believe that one man's going to come save us. Populism is not Masonic. It just isn't, because that would contradict the rule of law and government as a moral framework. Demagogues are bad. These are people that appear like Hitler, like Mussolini, like Stalin, like Lenin, like Napoleon. They appear at a time because people are unhappy and resentful, and they think one man's going to save them, and that man never saves them. There's a theory called the great man theory, that all of human history is shaped by great men. That's nonsense. Great men, or what we call great men in this theory, is just the result of people's unhappiness. And it's people's unhappiness and their desire to improve the system that really changed the world. It's us. We must resist the demagogue. We must resist idolatry, worshiping politicians, worshiping systems. The greatest evil of the 20th century is idolatry. And when I say idolatry, it's ideology. Isms are just so evil. Capitalism, socialism, communism, fascism. Isms are terrible things. They're thought forms that masquerade as good ideas. The worst invention of the modern world was idolatry, and it was invented in order to control people. We should stop calling ourselves any of these isms. There are aspects of these ideas that are good, but I am not a socialist. I'm not a communist. I'm a human being. Liberty as self-mastery. If you want to practice liberty, then master yourself, because as Masonry says, it's not to be a libertine. It's not to just indulge yourself. It's not to just drink and eat and have sex and be lazy. That's not liberty. Equality must be practiced as a fair allocation of political power and not a system of social flattening. If you want to make everybody the same, that's not Masonry. Masonry's here. We love the differences in people. We're just trying to give people equal access to the institutions. Fraternity as the idea of universal brotherhood. Universal brotherhood is the idea, and this is not brotherhood like men. This includes women, it includes homosexuals, it includes transgender people, it includes all people. Every human being is part of the brotherhood of man. Masonry is teaching us that. Pluralism without relativism. Pluralism is the idea that you can have two sets of laws under one system. That's the idea that you could have like a town that's filled with Muslims and another town filled with Jews. They could have their own laws, and that would not degrade the entire system. And we do this. What do you think? Like little, you go to a big city, you have like little China and little Italy. Like you have these places where all the Italians live or all the Polish live. And sometimes like the main police force kind of allows them to kind of govern themselves. You have this example in New York, like the Jews in New York, the Hasidic Jews, they kind of police themselves. And the NYPD, unless there's something egregious, kind of lets them do their own thing. This is pluralism, and this is also very Masonic. But pluralism doesn't mean relativism. It doesn't mean that it's okay to do whatever you want because every value is the same. Masonry is cosmopolitan, it's globalist, and it's internationalist. You can't read Masonic history and avoid this assumption. If you think Masonry is ethnocentric, if you think it's nationalistic, if you think that it is isolationist, you're wrong. It's not. Masonry has never, in any of its rituals, ever said anything like that. It says the contrary. And ultimately, we see the temple, the Masonic Lodge, as a microcosm. It's a political symbol of civilization. Its officers, its symbols, its objects, its configuration, its dimensions is a small civilization. It's a microcosm. And when we go to lodge as Masons, we are practicing civilization. We are practicing all the things that I have discussed and way more. Because ultimately, Masonry is, people are like, oh, it's a charity organization. Man, we're not a charity organization. That was an invention in order to get people to stop thinking that we're trying to take over the world. This is not a networking group. Masonry is a war machine that is charged with changing the world. And it starts with an education of Masons to become the future leaders of the civilizations those Masons resided. Masons make the best political leaders. And I challenge anyone to tell me otherwise. So taken together, Masonry's political ideal is a free, virtuous, cosmopolitan commonwealth of self-governing individuals bound by law, elevated by fraternity, and united by a shared moral horizon. Sounds noble, doesn't it? Well, I end my presentation, and I'll take some questions now, with the idea that, again, not all Masons are equal. So if you're a Mason on this presentation, and you belong to an institution that doesn't accept women, you belong to a Masonic institution that still doesn't recognize and accept visitors that are African American, lodges that don't accept homosexuals, a lodge that promotes nationalism, that promotes ethnocentrism, because you think white people are better than everyone else. That's not Masonry. And again, that's why I'm a co-Mason. because it's the only Masonic institution that actually does what the ritual has instructed us to do. So I'll end there and I'll take any questions. I'm going to stop sharing your screen. Yeah. Isha.
Hi, Matthias. My name is Isha Snow, and I am not currently affiliated with a lodge, although I've been speaking with a woman who I believe maybe works with this organization. She's talked with me about lodges that are co-gendered, and I have an interest in joining. But I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for your talk today. It was very informative. I am currently studying sociology and anthropology at Washington State University in Vancouver. And a lot of the things that I'm learning, I feel could add to this conversation. You referenced Marx and other social theorists and talking about how they were divinely inspired. And I personally feel like I recently went through something akin to gnosis, but I would like to speak more with you directly, and I'm wondering if that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Brother Patrick or Brother Benny over here will put my email address in the chat. You can send me an email.
Hello, thank you for your time. I'm a complete noob, really don't know anything about it. I came here to learn a little bit about it, and one of the things that I wanted to understand was if Masonry started out a certain way, where it was only acceptable for, a male to be a part of it, what changed from that idea, which it was created this way, to now including people like myself being a woman, for example?
That's a very good question, Bex. It's essentially there's been schisms. So modern Masonry started in 1717, roughly, and it was an Anglo institution. It was created in England. Um, we can go into history. Some people argue that, but essentially that's what's accepted by most people. And they did not, they literally in their constitutions did not accept slaves and women. Um, and that idea spread into Europe and into the Americas, everywhere essentially. And it actually is it's really in France that these ideas start to break down. It is what we call continental masonry or French masonry, where the French being, in my opinion, kind of more open-minded, they start allowing more people. Um, women, there's instances of women becoming masons, but really as an institution, it was in 1882. There's an organization called Le Droit Humain, which was the first co-Masonic order that started allowing women in. And the organization that I represent, Universal Co-Masonry, is an offshoot of Le Droit Humain. So essentially, it is the courage of certain men in certain places to dare to initiate women that started, organizations that started accepting women. But I should say that the vast majority of Masons worldwide still do not accept women.
So what was the idea behind it? Is it because women should be at home tending children? Was it because, was it some idea as to why not women, so it could at least be understood what the idea was that created this?
There's nothing clear in the history. What we
Okay.
can extrapolate is that in Anglo culture, in England essentially, but most of Europe in 1717, women were pieces of property. And
I
so
see.
they didn't really have the freedom to go to meetings. And really, like, women were just considered kind of to be, you know, stupid little creatures that couldn't think, they couldn't understand symbolism. Other arguments that were made included that, oh, if women came to lodge, men would want to sleep with them. And so we can't have women here because of propriety issues.
I see.
Really, to me, that's a damnation on men because they can't control themselves, right?
Right.
But these are what certain individuals as Masons made arguments at the time.
Okay.
But mostly they just thought there was also, oh, women can't keep a secret. It's a lot of nonsense, really, right?
It's pretty
And I think
funny.
mostly it's because the Anglo culture they just didn't respect women, really.
I see.
And because the British had colonies with slaves, they didn't accept slaves from the beginning.
So if we were to say unite with the other Masons that were male only, how do they view lodge like this where there is women and men? Do they grant it as is this legitimate in their eyes, or is it something like blasphemy to them?
So institutionally, we are clandestine. We are male craft. We call them male craft. This is kind of short. Male craft institutions view us as not legitimate because
Okay.
they haven't given us one of their pieces of paper, so we're not part of their pedigree, which is another nonsensical system they invented to try to control the lineage of Masonry, hence the schisms. But ultimately, they don't see us as Masons because if you're present during the initiation of a woman, then you're not, you've violated all your obligations. It's it's nonsense, really. You
Okay.
know, once you're made a Mason, you're a Mason. Like there's a ceremony, and it's a very spiritual ceremony where you're consecrated a Mason, and once you're consecrated a Mason, you're a Mason. Nobody can take that away from you. Even if you're expelled from an organization, once you're a Mason, you're always a Mason. Like, the status
Wow.
can never be taken from you. And so there are many, many women Masons today, and they're all legitimate Masons. And in fact, I would say that the organizations with women are practicing Masonry better, 100 times better than the institutions that are only male craft.
So if one was to join, say like the Co-Masonry, but I personally live in South Carolina and there's only male allowed lodges here. How does one be a part of this and be a part of this group if in your state it's only the men are allowed?
We do have a lodge in South Carolina. So if you go to the Brother Patrick or Brother Ben will put this in the chat, but if you go to our website, you can fill out you can go to the membership request form and somebody will contact you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
There is a message in the chat. Someone asks, would you say that Freemasonry functions as a civilizing process, a system that takes a human in their raw form and refines them into someone capable of contributing to the building and maintaining of society?
I would absolutely say that Freemasonry is a civilizing process. Not civilizing process like I don't think of like European civilization per se. It's the idea that civilization, that cooperation between human beings is extremely important. So Masonry brings you in as an enter-apprentice in the first degree, and you move through different degrees. And each of these degrees actually has a political lesson. So it slowly teaches you, not only by example, but by a slow education in theory and in morals, how to act in a civilization. And by participating in the system of Masonry, you kind of start to understand how civilization should work. How about Tyler?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell the lady who was speaking before me that the MPS, the Masonic Philosophical Society meeting for South Carolina was 2 days ago. And there will be another one next month. So yeah, the lodge exists in the state. It's not connected to, if you're like messaging the actual like Mailcraft Masonry, people, they're obviously going to say in this state, there's no organization for you, but that's just because it's a different institution that you're communicating with. That was it.
Thank you, Tyler. Samuel.
Hey, hello, how you doing? First, I want to thank you for the lecture. I am a Freemason. I'm a former Prince Hall Mason, and I just want to thank you for for tonight's lecture and stuff. I'm definitely was very impressed. I'm currently back active with another Masonic order, but I have been searching for something probably a little bit more up this alley right here, a little bit more that gives lectures and stuff. But I do want to thank you tonight for that.
Well, thank you for coming, Samuel. Appreciate you coming.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions from social media?
We do not at this time.
Okay, well, there's no other questions. Then I'm going to end today's session. Again, I'll just leave you with the thought that Masonry is civilization. It is a civilization within civilization. And more importantly, you should talk about politics and religion in your lodges. No, you don't talk about Donald Trump and Biden and, the characters. You should talk about the theory, the ideas, the morals, the concepts. If we don't start to learn to talk to one another, we're going to lose our civilization. So we need to learn to talk to one another. We need to start discussing ideas, and we need to start doing it as Masons in our own lodges. So have a good night, everybody.